Just thinking, like, well, I used to live in Bristol, and I was just thinking about the that whole thing of that statue had been like a big issue for a very long time. Lots of people were really unhappy about it, and then of course it kind of came to breaking point where everyone was just like, this will then happen, and yeah, and I think that it kind of, although I'm not sure, I wonder if it has kind of unified the community when I think about it, because actually maybe it was just a kind of. It's more a result, it's more like a breaking point. It's a thing that happened because of a sort of a deeply seated feeling within the society there. And that's in the same way actually that everything eventually, like in the same way that everything goes or is destroyed, it's just it comes up against something and can't exist anymore.
So do you think this case, I mean, put it to the table, kind of question
It is a one-off incident, but also it then becomes a symbol of something, and that's a unifying factor because you can refer to it as a cultural reference.
And I think Bristol, it's made everyone else around aware that Bristol is quite a cool place where people come together and agree on things. And so, I've been to Bristol once or twice, I wouldn't have known that without that.
Actually, it's done something. It's done something. I don't know.
It's because there's a very immediate local community, but then there's the community that is wider of people who are a certain mindset that I think is what you're saying. It sort of helps to bring them together. And also, it's like a voice of it's a symbol of something that shows what they've been thinking about, what they would like to happen, why the things that brings people together, or lets people know what the climate is, but it's like, it's shocked to me, that actually it happened rather than just talking
Am I right? They didn't go to prison, did they? They got off, didn't they?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. So that also shows a certain establishment realising that they've got to move with the times, I think. So.
Oh, yeah, sorry, new face to the table. What's your name?
I'm Rod. Yeah, Dave probably didn't mention me because I'm video to learn the song, so.
Rod, welcome. A number of people, few people here like Rod were not born when the first Talkaoke was going. I don't know what's happened to my Rod.
We just use this mic, Okay. Yeah, it's better than me. And this is supposed to be old school talking. I'll take this off. It's not working, Mike.
Talkaoke's
It's not working. It's not working. It was working, then it won't work. I've broken it, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. One common theme of Talkaoke, there's always some sort of sound problem at some stage. But that's the good. Not that, but to be fair, the sound was beautiful over there in the other room.
To a live link when you go.
Yeah, that was a bit. Yeah, that was ambitious. I mean, going to Uganda, that really taking it to another level.
So yeah, I just had a thought there, based on, kind of what you were saying, about this whole discussion of the Colston statue, that then it made me think, is there any kind of destruction that is not creative in some way? Because whenever anything is destroyed, it's always kind of in an attempt to create something else. I think even not even if we think about this just in terms of humans, like if you think about, this kind of cheesy idea that but also our creation is very much based on destruction. I mean, the fact that we've managed to evolve, that we're made of like very kind of heavy elements, things like carbon, iron, these things are all made in the middle of stars, and the only way we can be formed out of them is through their explosion. So then, I don't know, then I'm kind of trying to think now of an example of like a destruction that is purely destructive and has no creation.
So can we see
Holocaust?
any others? Any calls?
I mean,
Holocaust. Maybe you could argue.
I'm not.
Most of the Middle East, Syria.
So when we have that.
No, indeed. I'm not saying that it's for necessarily for like the intention of positive creation or like the creation of something positive or something that everyone wants. But I think that I don't know actually. Maybe more like nuclear war.
I don't think anyone's ever going to go anywhere because it's just we suddenly thought. Yeah, I think but I think
I know. I don't want to go down an argument.
someone, I mean, I don't want to, I'm the man in the middle, but someone who is destroying something, they're doing it for a reason. They think they are creating something, right? Don't they?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's always an ulterior motive. I mean, people do things for a reason, right? Especially if you're talking about global conflicts, it's hard to imagine that stuff gets to the government because.
So the aggressor might have a good reason. They might think they're being creative.
So there's a festival called Burning Man, which is probably where they build stuff out of wood and then they just burn it. And nothing is created as such aside from the act of building and then burning. So the good examples earlier they said, talking about temples and structures of worship and things of that nature. People will build a temple for a week in the hottest place they've ever been. And during the course of the festival you'll put up things that you want to forget. Not forget, but like come to terms with, I guess. So there'll be lots of people who've had relatives who died or particularly difficult parts of their life, lots of pets, and you'll put up these photos of them there, and on the second last day of the festival, they just burn it. And they watch it burn. Yeah. And the rest of the festival is a big old crazy party, but that day is just silent while it burns. Everyone watches and no one does anything else. And that's a good way to celebrate destruction.
Yes, it's good. You know, as well, it's quite, it reminds me of the kind of things that certain traditional, for want of a better term, cultures do. Even when farming and farming, they burn fields or whatever to bring new growth over time. You know, so kind of feelings.
So there are some destruction, basically.
Sorry, So we have destruction that's not necessarily creative, but it does something, right? So any thoughts on this? Any thoughts on destruction? We're still back on destruction and creation.
I think we're moving on to a little bit like the whole concept of impermanence, aren't we? That nothing is permanent and nothing will remain, everything will be destroyed. And it's probably quite good to build it into what you're doing a little bit. So maybe when we look at these buildings, we shouldn't be annoyed by them, we should just realise they're only going to be there for 20 years. And they're going to build something 3 times the size after that. So.
But perhaps the basic thing behind this argument is that we're all going to die. And thank heavens, you know. So there is something good that comes out of destruction. And, you know, when you look at cultures that were incredibly conservative, where nothing changed for thousands of years, like the ancient Egyptian civilization, which was extremely conservative. If anybody had a new idea, they were pummeled out of existence. Their idea was chipped away if it was written in stone. So you realise that would sort of create a really boring society to live in. Yeah. So we all have to, you know. The dying is important, and the dying is the destruction of you. And that creates something else, doesn't it? So, you know, maybe that's the bottom line.
So we should, destruction and death is all a good thing. Will Talkaoke ever die? That's another question.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to relate to death and construction, because I mean, I'm from 5 minutes down the road, and this is the first time I've seen this area in the next 20 years, and I don't belong here. And I think we live our time. There is comfort in the familiar, and I'm on the cusp of feeling uncomfortable where I live, because it's no longer familiar. So we live our lives in a particular circumstance, and when it changes too much, then I think it's good that we die, basically.
Yeah, I agree.
So dying is actually, what you're saying is that dying is actually a good thing because you can't cope with the change.
No, not because you can't cope with the change. It's to allow other people
to come through
and change things that they see.
Okay.
So it would be, you know, the idea of people living for 300 years. Imagine if Rupert Murdoch was going to live to 350 years old. What a fucking bore that would be. And the one hope we've got at the moment is that people don't generally get to more than 100. So you know that when Rupert Murdoch goes, something is going to change. and thank God for that. But if
So
they,
has anyone else got thoughts about dying as being a good thing? Right, what's your name?
Hi, my name's Khalil. Khalil.
Khalil.
Sorry, I just need to say something urgent to you.
Oh, sure. Sorry, Margaret.
It's urgent, but it's very pleasant. There's some live music starting next door, so Dave can get a little break if he wants to. He may want to sit here on his own as well. In a cool room, there's live music. Come and enjoy the music, or carry on talking, either.
Sorry, distraction and creation. Have you ever a really good talk over here? Anyway, yes, sorry. You can have the mic.
So I get your point about kind of changing areas. I grew up in Brixton. I've seen it change over the last 30 years. But my point was following on from your point about people dying sometimes. The inevitability of it being good. One of the most accidentally reassuring things I've ever heard was I was working with the worst person that I've ever met, and I'm not exaggerating. And they said what I'm about to say with a note of sadness and deep regret, and it just filled me with so much hope. And she turned to me and she said, "Isn't it a shame? Even the very rich must die." And sometimes when I'm getting upset about how unfair the world is, I'm like, even the very rich must die.
Everyone must
and it just
die.
puts such a smile on my face.
But there's a lot of people trying to stop people dying. Is that a bad thing? Come on.
I think that's super interesting, your point, because I think that a lot of rich people are now trying to do even more investigation on like getting older. And my question to all of you would be, do we really want to get older than even 100 years? I mean, because I don't want to, I think even 100 is
So who here would like to live more than 100 years?
just behind you.
Sorry? Let's just have a quick show of hands. Who wants to live over 100 years? Yeah? Maybe? Mikey? Yeah? Okay, go
I was
on.
going to say my uncle lived until he was 102. He had all his faculties. He could talk you. He could sit here and talk you from now until, And he was sick for a week and then he died. So, 102 and he looked very good.
Brilliant. So is that a good thing?
I have to say I don't actually think about my immortality until I was 50. I don't even consider it. But where I'm from in Newcastle, where you get absolutely pissed out of your mind because it's it's absolutely immortal. So you're facing the fact that you haven't got an infinite time on the earth. But I have to say I'd be happy with about 85, something like that. That'd be okay, as long as I've got happiness.
Okay, so happy with 85, and Newcastle looks quite a good age to live.
I couldn't care what age it is, as long as it's like your uncle, really. So it can be 130 for all I care, as long as I've got my faculties. And someone's still listening.
And you drop off quickly.
Someone's still listening to me.
Well, come to Talkaoke, I listen to you, yeah. So go.
I want to ask that man there if he's still happy to die at 85 when he's 84 and a half.
I'll see you in about 35 and a half years.
But it's true, there are people trying to live longer.
I was just going to say, I remember when the warnings on cigarettes first came out, and I was in Austria, and I was having this at a meal in the mountains with these two women who were in their 80s, and she picked up my packet of cigarettes, and she roared with laughter and said, "What a ridiculous thing." And she said, "What is the point of living to the age that I am?" She said, "We are useless for society. Myself and my friend, all we do is occupy other people's time. There is no point of us being alive whatsoever. Why on earth should you stop smoking?" And I thought that she actually had a very Austrian point of view. It's read that way. But she did have a very important point of saying, well, what is the point of prolonging life if you're not actually an active member of the world that you're living in? And that really was her point. So I listened to it with interest. So yeah, anyway.
And I would say that covers 90% of the population if you want to get into life being useful. just hanging around doing bloody nothing. Or we think we are, so I don't know.
You say something? No, I've got something. Anyone else got any thoughts on living? Yes.
I don't think it's to do with usefulness.
Right, what's it to do with?
I mean,
Destruction.
I mean, if I were, yeah, if I was held this look, I wouldn't care. But I think, oh, fuck it.
But you think it's not to do with usefulness, it's actually, like something, what you're saying, so like, you know, because otherwise there's a lot of people, you know, it's kind of ethical question of like, whether someone should be allowed to stay alive.
I don't think you have to start defining what is useful, and that's rather broad. I think if you're happy, you're therefore doing what you enjoy, you're doing what you enjoy.
So if you're happy, you should leave. If you're not happy, you shouldn't leave.
Just touching back on the topic of, I think you mentioned people doing investing a lot of resources into research to kind of prolong life beyond what it already is. I actually had an argument with, I've forgotten his name, he's a guy with a big beard, looks a bit like Alan Moore.
Aubrey de Grey.
God! I had an argument with Aubrey de Grey at a kind of a seminar workshop thing, and I said, like, are you not worried that you're in an already stratified society where so much wealth and power is like consolidated and concentrated in older, wealthier people? If the very rich don't die, unlike what you said earlier, then isn't that going to make it worse? And then he started talking about like, yeah, but you know, because people are living longer, people will just decide to have fewer kids, and society will sort itself out. And I thought that was super kind of blind. Really. But the whole room was on its
Isn't
side.
there an issue about there not being enough kids? There aren't enough kids, right? Question. Was there a point?
Yeah, I have one point. If the rich live forever, they'll care about the future and the environment and everything else.
Or will they just insulate themselves against it?
I disagree. I don't think so. I think it's a really positive way of thinking. But I was working on the topic of what she said. Yeah, they would. When rich people, the thing is, even when they die, and he said, yeah, it's cool that they died, they will give their money to someone, and we have other rich people. So actually, it doesn't really change anything. It's more like, I would say, the empathy on which we all should work.
I mean, talk about valuing life. We have people that are pretty rich now, arms manufacturers. They don't care about people that die in wars using their guns and that kind of thing. So it's almost perverse that they we should try and lengthen life when we already have a disrespect for it at the moment. There's no...
Right, what do we think? Is there any circumstances where you think it is a good idea to lengthen life? No?
Any circumstances? That's a really big question. I agree with your point about kind of it would just increase the propensity for kind of parasitism by rich and powerful on the more numerous but less rich and powerful. Because if the parasite never dies, then it can just sit there and eat you.
It dies after. It dies after the thing that is feeding it.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about maybe people in general just want to get older, and because we don't know what will come after death. I mean, it depends on what you believe in, but there are a lot of people thinking that we will have an afterlife, so maybe we should all believe in an afterlife, then we will be like, oh yeah, let's die. If you believe in an afterlife, then murderers are nice people. Like, I don't consider it a very good argument about how life.
Depends what the afterlife's like.
Yeah, that's great.
So, I think we need to have... Oh, we've got some new face at the table. We know your face already.
Hello, I'm Abby.
Yeah, and we know your face.
I'm Mikey.
Mikey, so...
turn up channel 2 a little bit.
Channel 2. You're this one, okay. Is that better? Is that better? I'm Mikey, yes. Now, Mikey, you just happened to arrive when I was just about to think about final thoughts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because at some point I've got to leave. But we can keep it going for a little bit longer. Have you got any thoughts? Since you've only got here, have Evie or Mikey, just one second, got any thoughts about living longer, living forever, all that kind of stuff? Is it it's generally these thoughts to be living longer seems to be a bad thing around the table. That's a general thing. Do you think maybe it might be a good thing or a bad thing?
I want to live healthier longer, right? So I try and eat my fibre and stuff like that. And I feel like I quite like this. I don't want to like them, but I really like reading science articles like this. Like doing this type of exercise in the morning really like will make you live a year longer or something like that. And you always read them, it's always on a sample which is not big enough, and there's like the findings aren't conclusive, but I still find them really interesting to read.
Mike, any thoughts on this subject?
I would like to live a long time. I wouldn't want everyone else to live a long time. It's like when Rick and Morty, Rick goes to a planet where they've solved the problem of eternal youth, and he's like this celebrity because he's the only old person on the planet. I'm kind of like that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, I would mention time travel. If we ever invent time travel, we could go forward and still be young. And the thing that brought me to mind is that I just had a Back to the Future moment with you two. There seems to be some kind of before and after. I'm really not sure what it is. Are you aware of each other's existence?
And what was it before?
Come together as well at the end of the world when you come together. You're not supposed to meet yourself in the future, are you? You know? It's extremely worrying.
Yes.
I wanted to make a point on what Eddie just mentioned with the exercises you would have to do every morning. I think sometimes as we would, or I think if I would have to force to do myself, I think I would live less long. So it would even reduce my, because I would like have to force myself, it would make me grumpy, and so I think, it's better not to do it, because then I would live longer.
Okay, so live fast, die young, kind of thing. Any other thoughts?
On the exercise thing, I teach martial arts, and I've seen older martial artists kind of retire, and it's as soon as they retire that it all goes downhill. So, good point. On the parasitism point, they're already doing research into transfusing young blood into older people, so it's already literally parasitism. So death, I'm not saying death is always good, but immortality, almost always bad.
Okay, immortality bad. Rod?
Oh, I do think on maybe a slightly more optimistic note that the rich living forever, bad, I agree. But I think that the tech, with stuff like phones and stuff like VR, like it does eventually become accessible. And maybe I would take the rich living forever if I could also live forever, 5 years on. I don't know. I feel like,
Positive.
My final thought is I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens.
When I once had a general anaesthetic, it made me like lose the fear of death. It was just like, boom, you're out, and that's So I felt like more at peace in my mortality. Exactly. Any thoughts about? Let's have a recap of names because I can't know what's your.
You're right in the middle there.
Well, maybe I'll wrap it up because I do have to leave at some point. Maybe we should let Mikey.
Enjoying yourself.
No, that's all right. Let's have a final thought. Should we have final thoughts? Final thoughts.
Keep it going.
Yeah, we'll keep it going. But this is our final thoughts on the session that we've had, where we've done creativity, destruction, life, war, and living forever, and that kind of stuff. Just a few light subjects like that. Any final? Harry, give us a final thought.
I'm just blessed that we'll be able to, we can communicate in this kind of way. There's so many people who can't, who are alive at the moment in various sort of states of living.
Nice.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I'm going to be boring and say I agree with that too.
Nice one.
I thought the last one was last thought, so I got a lot of it out. No,
you can skip if you want. Final thought.
I mean, I think we touched on something earlier, the looming prospect of death. Gives you a little bit of urgency to create. So.
Right, Final thought? We don't know your name. What's your name?
My name's Amber.
Amber.
Yeah,
you have the microphone, so I'm not too far away.
I just came in at the end, but I think as long as you're healthy, happy, and have purpose, it doesn't matter how long you live for.
Right, nice one.
Hey, I'm Benta, and I wrote at the end, but also I think about afterlife and think about life and how long we want to live. I think that we are a little bit overthinking this whole topic because actually we should, because we are so privileged that we are not eaten by any other animals. We are like the apex of the apex. And
we should be grateful.
We should be really grateful and what's going on, and think about the other chickens and beef and what's happening in their
What it's
afterlife.
like for the pigeons. What it's like for the pigeons and the little mice down the mice in the underground. You know, that's not nice life, is it? What's your,
I think there's some danger of being scared to die. I think it's important to be comfortable with that, so you can take risks and maybe die. I think we were talking about like destruction and creation. I think without being comfortable with your ultimate destruction, you're not going to have any creation. You're not going to push yourself. You're always going to sit in a place that you feel safe.
final thought?
I think after this discussion, I quite like destruction now. I kind of think you have to be more careful about these things, but I
Now you've heard about this bomb
positive
making.
examples of destruction, and I'm like, you know what? Destruction, if you got some hopeful plan of what will come after, I'm down with it. Hopeful destruction.
Nice one, nice one.
Otherwise, no.
I think we'll leave it there. I know we've got a new face, but we're wrapping this up. You can't really have a final thought or something you haven't actually. What's your name?
Saul.
Hi, Saul. And Saul is old school Talkaoke as well, so come in the middle. Right, I'm going to wrap it up for now, and then there'll be another session.
What is Talkaoke, Yasi?
A place you talk.
Okay, there we go. Do you want to have a little go at this, RT? Because we've got a few hosts potentially lined up to have a go. So it's a hot seat there in the middle. The first thing you need to do is ask everyone their names.
What's your name?
You need to then offer the microphone.
What's your name?
Zoe.
What's your name?
I'm Timna.
What's your name? What's your name?
Get the mic in closer though, Archie.
What's your name?
Saul.
What's your name?
Khalil.
What's your name?
Mikey.
What's your name?
You also you put your water so you can't dry.
You have to ask them ask people what do they want to talk about.
What do you want to talk about? What?
It's pretty warm here inside. Do you want to speak about temperature?
Let's talk about temperature. People say that they're a little bit worried that it's going to get too hot over the next couple of weeks. I disagree. I really like it hot. I don't know whether that's because I'm like a half kind of Arabic and so kind of my body is a bit more suited to dealing with that kind of stuff, or it's just because the sunshine is lovely. I don't know.
I really like it when you get into like a hot car and it's really, really hot. Weirdly, I don't like saunas, but I like that thing about like getting into a really, really hot car and you can't even touch the steering wheel. It's so hot that everything's melting in there. I really like that. And then you obviously start driving and then you get the fresh air. It's a bit like jumping into the opposite of jumping into an icy pool.
You raise your hand. Oh, yeah, I don't see you.
I just want people to think about, anytime you're feeling uncomfortable or too hot, just remember the last time it was really bone-chillingly freezing. And when you were sitting in a damp British home with no effective insulation and just rising damp, and it's just the worst and most awful feeling. So I always think about that, and as a result, never mind the heat, absolutely love it. Even if I'm sweltering, I'll just conjure up those horrible months of freezing.
So it's your now.
See, that is a nice bit of nostalgia for me. I much prefer that vision than being in a car. Too hot, can't breathe, sweltering. I hate, not hate, I don't like the heat. So I much prefer cold, not so much that, but cold temperature. That's much more me.
What's your name?
Kieran.
What's your name?
Sarah.
So, anyone else got hands up?
Alright, so I'm from India and I'm just visiting. And last month we had temperatures that went up to almost 50 degrees. So this is very pleasant for me. So I don't mind at all. And in India actually, so similar to when you have heat waves here, you don't really have the infrastructure to deal with it. So in India, when it gets, I live in Delhi, it gets really cold. And by really cold, by our standards. So it gets down to like 2 degrees sometimes, 3 degrees, 2 degrees. And we have no capacity to deal with it. We have like marble floors and really high roofs. So it's, to us that's bone chilling. And I would rather 50 degrees or the heat wave that you're about to have than that kind of cold. So I'm actually quite comfortable.
And you?
Thank you. That's super interesting because I also prefer the cold. I mean, I'm from Austria, so I'm like used to warm summers and cold winters. But I prefer the cold. For me, like 27 degrees, that's enough. Yeah, but I would like to know what did you do with 50 degrees? I mean, did you go outside?
No, you can't really go outside. So there are, you get advisories. And so between say 10 and 11 a.m. and 3 to 4 p.m. It's advised that you don't go outside. Or if you do, you know, have cold water on you, you cover your head. But the thing is that there are a lot of people who actually, their job is to work outdoors. So we do also get a lot of heat-related deaths at that time. And also I have a friend from Austria who was doing her PhD from a Delhi university, like part of her PhD was there, and she cried in the Delhi winter. So you should rethink how you would cope with winter if there was no infrastructure to deal with it. I don't think that would.
There is no infrastructure to deal with it, or in fact anything in this country. When it's cold, it snows, an inch of snow, everything stops, trains don't work, nothing works. I lived in Boston for 2 years, a few years ago, and there was on one occasion -10 and snow drifts that were a good like 1.5 meters tall, and that was really impressive. They have an incredible infrastructure for dealing with it because within minutes of the snow falling, there are tracks out on the street clearing the snow. Everybody is individually shoveling their own pathways, and you never get more than a couple of inches of snow, even if you're having to cut through real deep drifts. In this country, we don't have an infrastructure for dealing with heat or cold. Luckily, it's a temperate climate. Otherwise, I think we'd be in real trouble.
Yeah, I agree. Our preparedness for extreme weather is going to need to improve because extreme weather events are going to get much more common over the next coming years and decades and stuff. I remember when I lived in Bristol and it snowed once, and they gritted all the main roads but none of the back streets, and Bristol is famously all hills. And so I was walking to uni one morning and I just heard, and there was a Nissan Micra going diagonally down the street with a terrified young woman in it, going, like just looking out, turning the wheel, but just nothing was happening, just going diagonally down this hill. So like even when we do have the infrastructure for it, it tends to be, for the big stuff. And so, if you live on a smaller street or if in a rural community or whatever, you can often get completely neglected, I guess. I grew up in London, so it's the centre of the universe. I don't know.
What's your name? What's your name?
Max.
What's your name?
Oscar.
Any other?
I always thought I wanted to live in what you call a tropical country, so that it's never cold or hot. Well, let's say it's always warm, because I love the warmth. Until I was in one, and then I realised insects, and I suddenly thought, actually, you know what? I'd rather live in London because things that sting and fly, not nice.
got a point?
Just about the infrastructure. So I grew up in Northumbria, so in sort of rural northeast. Actually, out there, when it snows, they're fine. Like the tractors come out, clear out all the roads, and like local communities tend to respond directly to what needs to happen. So I mean, even that first lockdown, Christmas, I think it was August, whenever we had snow, whichever one it was, yeah, I was up there, and with my dad, loads of ice, skidded into a ditch, and then we just got the farmer up the road. He got his tractor, I didn't have to pull the air or anything, pulled it out, and that was that. So I think in cities we're just much more, it's much more kind of precarious. However, when the electricity goes out, that's a much bigger issue than cities.
I was going to say that I love it when it's hot weather because it's one of the few times that stops me and slows me down. It stops me thinking so much, it just relaxes me. So I think that's why I love the warmth. The only thing I would say, being in London, is I have to be near water, so I carry a little paddling pool with me. So my daughter and I, literally, it's the best £5 I've ever spent. I got it 5 years ago, and I know where the taps are in a couple of the local parks. So today we just went to a park. I knew where it was, so I filled it up. So as long as there was a sprinkler or anywhere I can dip in and cool myself down, I'm very happy. Yeah.
Anyone? What's your name?
My Esther.
I think that's brilliant. I've never heard of somebody carrying a paddling pool around before. That seems like a completely ingenious idea. I mean, I don't really have anything to say other than wow. What a brilliant suggestion. I'm going to do that.
Any other?
I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm from a hot country. I love the hot sun. I mean, I just think you're just free, you know, there's no, I mean, even in London, you're just free, no coats. Don't have to worry about coats. I mean, okay, the rain might fall, but, you know, it's just free, really.
It's probably not going to be that good, but I like the feeling of being held by the heat. And by that I mean, when I was in Italy, when I was about 11, I remember looking at the thermometer and it was 28 degrees. And I was thinking, I like this feeling, I feel held by the heat. And so any time it's 28 degrees, I feel held.
I mean, what she's trying to say, she didn't really have a very good mother who didn't hold her, so. But yeah, I understand that feeling, yeah.
So I do know it.
So I think the thing about heat is the heat stress only gets bad if it's very humid. So where I grew up, which is in the eastern part of India, it's incredibly humid. So you can be completely dry, freshly bathed, in a crisp shirt, and you step out, and from the time that you walk from your house to the bus stop, you're drenched in your own sweat, and that's what makes heat really, really bad. So in dry heat, I actually completely agree. I mean, I hate winter because of the number of layers I have to put on and how long it takes to get dressed. Whereas in the summer, you can just throw something on, and even better if you carry your own pool.
Not to be a complete contrarian, but I get why people love the heat. I understand completely. I'm from South Wales. I'm from there, so I love rain. I love wind. Because it reminds me of home, and it's the weather I'm most comfortable in. I'm much more comfortable. You know, I've always worn shorts if it was above 12 degrees, because it was the sort of, I was always used to it, and also I grew up playing rugby quite a lot. So, sideways rain, covered in mud, that's what I sort of love. I understand that's why people would love the heat completely. It's objectively nicer, but I love the layers, I love the coats. Anytime, I saw this heat today and I dread, because I was like, what the hell? Genuinely, it's like, oh god, the tube, oh god, the bus.
what am I going to do to dress? I'm going to be sweaty. How am I going to not stink? All of that.
On the subject of layers and coats and stuff, I do have to agree. So I generally love the heat, hate the cold, but on the subject of being held by the heat, I love puffer jackets. I think everyone should own at least one puffer jacket. One of the best feelings you can get is when it's really cold and you've got a big puffer jacket on and you hug your friend who's also wearing a puffer jacket and it's like... But conversely, one of the worst feelings in the world is when you wake up on a cold morning and the duvet is covering your whole body and it's all lovely and cozy, and then your face is as cold as the room, and your face is telling the rest of your body, if you move this duvet 1 inch, the rest of you is going to feel like this cold. And so I just stay in bed in the winter.
I adore this conversation, and what you were saying about being held by the heat really resonated. My parents are from Singapore, so I guess I'm from Singapore in a way. I struggle in the UK, so I'm so dry. I'm just constantly dry. I have to like moisturize my eyes. I have these special eye drops. I have to like moisturize my skin. I have like the skin thing, and then when I go back to Singapore, like everything is okay, which is because of the humidity. And there was something else. It was in response to being cold. I guess I've become a real wimp actually, because I'm from Newcastle, but then London has changed me, and whenever I go up north, I'm like, good God, it's 10 degrees, colder, and I'm having a real battle at the moment, trying to find like an eco-friendly holiday that we can go to, which is like as warm as London, because we're so privileged to be in London with this kind of climate.
Could you holiday somewhere else in London?
Yeah, do you think it's acceptable to go camping in Hampstead Heath?
Yeah, probably.
If you can afford it.
The other thing about being hot is you're more likely, I'm not saying this is dodgy, to want to take your clothes off. And I do, well, not flaunt or anything, but I do like having clothes on. And I had another important thing to say. Oh yeah, I'm not saying that because I like the heat, I therefore don't like the opposite. I'm not presenting it as a dichotomy. I appreciate, I feel I wouldn't appreciate this heat so much had it not been the opposite. Anyway, less about the weather. Do you know Wim Hof? No, can I just say, this was the important thing. So, talking of Newcastle, now, sorry, it's incredibly good for you to be cold. You all know that. Apparently it is. So if you can be in shorts in Newcastle and go through the pain barrier, you'll do yourself good.
Well, I'll never do myself any good in that case, because I have now devised a thing where I've got the thermostat by my bed.
Granny.
And when I wake up in that duvet thing you're talking about, I turn up the thermostat, and only when it's got to 21 do I get out of that bed. But the trouble is, there is this point where you've got to leave the house to go to work, and that is a little bit difficult.
You don't go to work, do you?
Shut up.
And I don't want to be in the middle anymore. He wants to be in the middle.
I'll do it. Well done, Archie. That was amazing. Archie, you did brilliant. You were really good.
Okay, we're going to keep this going. My name's Saul, and I'm going to take over from Archie. Let's just hear it again for Archie. What an amazing tour the table that was. Incredible. So, this is Talkaoke. We've been talking about mostly heat and whether people like being hot or not. And it's not, I'd say so far, it's we've had some lovely accounts of where people are from, how they relate to the heat. And it's been an interesting tour of different climates. So we've got a couple more people
Anyone new at the table? Yeah? Yes, we've got a new face at the table. What's your name?
I'm Chantal.
Chantal, do you have anything to say about this before we go to the hands up?
I mean, I think it's just talking about the weather earlier. I just like feeling the elements, you know, like the wind. I do like feeling the sun like really clear and wonderful, you know. Because it feels as though it's rejuvenating my mind and it feels like a cleansing. And I like it darker. Yeah, it's good for my hair.
So the sun specifically, the elements, but mostly the heat. You're advocating.
Where I work in construction, and I get the chance to see the nice skyline and stuff like that, see some nice sunsets, things like that, but it can be very gloomy and depressing in the winter time and it's all overcast. And then sometimes you get some sun, and I swear I would stand there and just absorb it as if I'm some Egyptian or something, you know. It really helps.
Okay, thank you, Chantal. It's good to hear from somebody who works in the elements. I think that's an important one, isn't it? I wonder how many people around the table work in the elements. Tim?
Not me, I should say. But just in response to your point about the thermostat, my parents, they make a massive deal about telling me when they turn on the central heating for the first time in the year. And it's probably, like now, if it's in November at all, then that's a bad year for me. Like they literally will wait until, even sometimes it will be when we go home for Christmas, they make a point of telling me, oh, we've turned the central heating on for you. So they live in, it's not warm.
With the cost of heating bills, that's a big deal. They're really killing the fatted calf.
Round you that way. If the mic goes round you that way.
Yeah, no, I need to. Archie was amazing, but he also left me with a bit of a tangle here. Sorry, Archie, no shade being thrown in your direction. There we go. Okay. Did I see a hand over here? Yeah, go.
So I was just going to say that I completely agree with you, and I think I've just thrown a lot of shade at winter. So I just want to say my favorite thing about winter is the winter sun. And I really suffer in winter, so I have like vitamin D problems and all of that. So I know that it can be really good for you, the cold, but I love the sun. And I love knowing, you know, that just getting it on my skin and knowing that I'm getting my vitamin D. And it's my favorite part of winter is actually being out in the sun, which is hard again because I live in Delhi and it's hella polluted. And we don't have that many blue sky days, but when the sun does come out, it's the most glorious thing. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, maybe we should also hear from people about, given that they have preferences. Some people have said, you know, they've really talked about how much they hate the winter or the summer, as well, at the same time as they're talking about their favourite time of year and their favourite temperatures. Maybe we should hear what's the saving grace. But go on, you had your hand up.
Just to go on off what they both said, which is about feeling the elements, either which way. I think it's almost very important that you experience extreme elements which are sort of inverse to what you're used to or acclimatized to. So for me it is the heat today, and for others it might be the cold or the wind. So I think it humbles you, it does, in so much as you can, because it just throws you off that little bit, and it can change so much of your day, your mood, everything. I think that little bit of humbling can be really important. You know, when everybody works in the offices, there's air conditioning, you know, everything's kept at 20 degrees no matter what time of year. So I think that little bit of humbling's brilliant, and I think it's very necessary that people live extreme conditions which are different to the ones they grew up in.
I mean, that's a lovely idea. We're humbled by the elements, by the temperature. We've got a new face at the table. Just say hello. What's your name?
Hello, my name's Reese.
Hello, Reese. I'm going to bring the two of you in because I know that you're waiting to say something about this. We've been talking about temperature, about your favourite time of year. Do you like it? Are you a fan of winter? Lots of people have been saying that they are acclimatised to the country or the temperature, the climate that they grew up with. Is that true? Do people feel connected to that? You know, no, not at all. But do you have anything to add on this before we move on?
I like the heat. I've come from a place that's very sunny. I like the sun, yeah.
I can't quite hear you.
I like the sun, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, so far I think that's, you know, Tim saying I'm from Northumbria, I like it when it's freezing cold. Okay, go ahead. Esther, isn't it?
It is,
Okay, go
it is,
ahead.
yeah. It was actually a point earlier, but to do with the clothes, with the layers, right? But I feel like when I'm wearing loads of layers, I just can't show people who I am. And also, I guess, hey, like we all love compliments. I feel like in the summer I get so many more compliments because I'm just ever more inventive and creative, and I guess maybe more flamboyant in the clothes that I get to wear. And I just feel like I generally connect more with people because people will have conversations with me about not like what my bum looks like, but like the pattern, you know, the patterns that I'm wearing and things. So that's good. The second point I was going to say was about responding to your point about being in the elements, which was such a beautiful point. Is that what's so good about the sun is that you could be in like a rubbish dump and then have the sun shine on your face, and it feels just as good as having the sun shine on your face as if you were on like a balcony in some kind of, I don't know, Vienna. It doesn't really matter because it's just you and this kind of universal, pure element.
Beautiful thought. Yes, we had another point over there.
Well, I think you hit on something really important there when you say that the sun. I would say the sun kind of generally, and obviously not for everyone, but generally brings out the best in a lot of people. People are a lot more forgiving. People are a lot more patient. You know, people are a lot more easygoing because of that kind of general background, good vibes. Whereas, you know, if it's cold and it's raining, then you get people kind of scurrying along and not caring about each other. Also, I just had to get this manifesto point out there. Most weather is fine. Love the wind. Sorry, love everything except the wind. Like, I love feeling the rain and the snow and the sun and the hail, everything. But the wind just makes everything worse. Talking, walking, driving, like using the phone, makes all the other weathers worse, makes dust worse. Wind, get in the bin. Everything else, great.
Unless you're a windsurfer.
Okay, we're talking about the elements here at Talkaoke. What did you have to say about
Yeah,
this?
you know, like recently I just went to Valencia. And anyway, when I came back to London, I thought to myself, how can I bring some of that like calmness into my time in London? You know, I was cycling, and I remember when I'd like bump into people, they'd just be like, relax, you know. And I don't know. Now when I'm back in London, I'm just trying to sort of put out that calm energy to other people, so that, you know, maybe it might be a ripple effect. I don't know. But yeah, maybe we can bring some of that sunshine to London when it's not so cold, when it's not so warm. I don't know.
Yeah, we should all be storing it up right now, like.
Yeah, on your point, I do think that when it's sunny, people are a lot more open and warm to each other. There's a feel-good, you know, mood in there, and I really enjoy that. But the other thing is, I struggle being in the UK actually because I like sunshine. I remember when I moved up to the north of England when I was 11. I remember just walking to the train station to go to school, feeling, I don't think I am actually sort of British. Like, I don't think my genes are from this part of the world because I struggle so much in the cold, and I've always believed that. I've just felt, yeah. But can I just introduce you to my friend who will talk about 40 degrees in where she's living in Portugal at the moment.
Have a seat. Have a seat at Talkaoke.
Although she's Irish, so you have to give her like a minute and then ban, otherwise she'll go on and on.
Okay, well, let's just, no, okay, go on. Sorry, let's just do a quick name round. We've got a few new faces trickling into the table, so what's your name? We'll do a quick name round.
Hi, I'm Nina.
Nina.
Zoe.
Chantel.
Max.
Khalil.
Esther.
Louise.
Oscar.
Tim.
Jeremy.
Kieran.
Okay, so now you all know each other. I think, Tim, you've been waiting to say something about this.
Yeah, because I mean, hearing people saying that people aren't as friendly, aren't as open, aren't as funny when it's in a cold climate is ridiculous. Newcastle, I mean, it's like a really vibrant place. There's a lot of humour. It's just a very different kind of way of dealing with things, and also there's a more nothing to do with the weather, but there's a more self-deprecating type of humour, which I think I much prefer. Like it's a really, people will put themselves down before they take the piss out of you, which I prefer.
So is there a kind of connection between the climate that you grew up in? I've heard this, a lot of people around the table have said, like, I'm from this area, or my parents are from this part of the world, and therefore I like this climate. And does it then reflect on your experience of that temperature, that climate, whether it's humid or dry? And also, does it have like personality traits that come with it? I think that's quite a kind of profound question.
That's a good point, because I was doing this Talkaoke in Blackburn a couple of weeks ago, and people are so calm, relaxed, and friendly up there. So, and it was freezing, you know, I had to get my North Face coat out. So, yeah, I wonder why, you know, I wonder why aren't people friendlier? Is it a London thing? Is it a city thing where people are a bit more, you know, intense? I don't know.
Okay, so I'll come to you in a second, Kieran. Max?
I would say, talking about Newcastle and everything there's a thing which is, it's not, everybody acknowledges that this place is ugly right now. The buildings are falling apart, nobody's making a lot of money, in just these areas there, Wales there. But we're in this hellhole together. And genuinely, it is it's that, I think, what you don't get with the heat, because it is a bit too easy to enjoy yourself, it's people will make the effort because they know, otherwise it's just too sad and too depressing. It's true. So that's why I think there's a certain amount of togetherness with having to face this ugly landscape and this wind.
Okay, so it's in adversity. I'll come to you in a second, Esther. Go on, Kieran.
Yeah, I just think you're missing out a little detail about Newcastle night out. I mean, like, every bar is about 2 meters away from the next one. Everyone is completely pissed, and they're friendly for a reason. And the reason why they're running around in t-shirts and tiny skirts is because they're full of alcohol, basically.
Okay, yeah, Esther, go.
We also were voted multiple times best sex life in Newcastle, rated. So we're also just full-on great natural vibes, not just the booze.
All-round friendly.
I agree though with the Wales thing. It's kind of like, it is a bit grey and a bit shit, but we're just going to be really canny, because if we're not, then what's it? Yeah, and London, because I did mention it before, like obviously there are places in London where it's, you know, marginalised groups, you know, people with not a lot of opportunities and stuff, but in London, like, there just kind of is so much that maybe we take it for granted as well.
Okay, go ahead.
I've been growing up in South London, in Brixton, and seeing it change over the last kind of 30-something years. I think it's also something that has been progressively getting more extreme in London. Is the fact that London's become more and more a city for money to move around in, and less a city for people to live in. And I think that has driven a bit of that kind of alienation and loss of community that you were mentioning. And, you know, you hate to see it, but change happens, and what you do what you can to kind of maintain and establish some more of that community vibe.
One second, we've just got a couple of new faces at the table. We're going to say hello. What's your name?
Owen.
Owen, welcome to the table, and what's your name?
Paddy.
Very nice to meet you, Paddy. So, what we've been talking about, this is Talkaoke, we've been talking about climate and what people's preferences are. Do they come from their genetic heritage? People have mentioned their parents, where they're from, why that's given them a certain kind of predilection for different climates. Now we've just been talking a little bit about whether it's also the adversity of a area, whether that's what makes it friendly, whether that's what makes the people more open and willing to interact with one another, as Esther was talking about. And yeah, those are the questions that are on the table. Go ahead.
That's right. I was going to say that London has become such a transient city that people just move in and out, and a lot of communities have been broken. For example, if you look at Elephant and Castle, the Agate estate, all those families, all those estates, and I know they were all run down and everything like that, but all those people, those families that live on the estate, I mean, they've all been moved out to elsewhere, and what's happening, they're pushing up lots of the flats, and those families are not included in that, and so people don't see their neighbours and stuff anymore, because you live in a tower block. Where I used to live, we had open walkways, but they've knocked it down and built it up. But everybody's now enclosed. So before we used to see our neighbours, now we don't really see our neighbours because safety by design, how they've done it now, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Right, so maybe we see each other. Again, you know, this is a property of a nice warm climate where everybody's out on the street seeing each other, or indeed could be just an urban design thing. Is this what makes a place friendly, welcoming? Is it what makes it inclusive? Go.
I just feel like there are so many factors other than the weather that decides whether or not people are friendly and approachable. I mean, what you're describing just now and what a lot of people have described, I mean, there's so many socio-economic, cultural factors to this. You could live in the same city and have wildly different experiences to the climate that you live in. So I don't think that's a factor at all. I do think some amount of personal adaptability comes into play. So if you grow up in a certain weather and climate and then you move to another very different climate, it takes you a little time to adapt. So I remember when I first moved to a cold climate, I got winter allergies. I'd never even heard of them. I was literally allergic to winter. So I think there's adaptability, but I don't think that's, I mean, your personality is not a factor of the climate. There are just so many other crucial factors.
Okay, Kieran, go ahead.
And I just wanted to talk about a bit of the vibe of Newcastle. If you were in like this area in the 1980s or 90s, it was very like Newcastle in the sense. I mean, all right, it was a bit racist. It was because of the Pakistani kind of thing coming in, and it was it was a big change. But if we can put that to one aside for a sec, that the working class neighbourhood that lived here since the 50s were very gregarious. Everyone would talk to you. If you went down that market, it would take you 3 hours to get down there, and it didn't matter who you were. I was a wanker with a middle class voice. They would talk to you, and I still think that's here. And I think the racism has sort of subsided a little bit, and I think it's important for us to remember that it is here, and we just need to engage. That's all.
When I first moved to Shoreditch about 10 years ago, I was a bit worried because I was concerned. I had to suddenly move here, and I was with a young child, and I thought, I am not going to meet any other parents or any other people, and it turns out it's one of the most community-focused places I've been to, particularly now with the livable streets. I walk, most of my friends have given up their cars, and we walk around places, and we interact much more with people, and it's a really lovely community now, this particular area, oddly enough. And yeah, I've noticed that they've put these restrictions in, but it's actually helped a lot to bring people together.
Okay, let's hear. This is your first go on the mic, so make it good.
Yeah, no, thank you. So now I moved here in 1991. I lived near Brick Lane, and we furnished our whole house out of Brick Lane. You could buy anything from teeth to a tank down there in those days, and then it changed, and you can see it changing. And then I actually moved out. I moved to Hampstead. And my practice did okay, I could buy a house, and I thought I'd move to this posh leafy place, and it was terrible. And I moved back.
Why was it terrible?
Nobody spoke to anyone. No one talked to one another, but it was an attitude. And I moved back here. I've had all sorts of wonderful experiences here. My kids are here, and then we power stolen. I had this really old car, and everyone knew it. And it got stolen, it got into the Hackney Gazette, and someone found it, and I got it back. And that's such a story of this. There is a very strong community, particularly here, and it's an environment, I think, because it's creative people, and so long as we can maintain, I mean, I think the magic would be keeping a sort of creative community mixed in with the original community, and you get something very strong. And it's only when you get pushed out even further again that it really changes.
I think that was excellent first go on the mic, thank you. I'm sorry about putting you under that pressure. Okay, so I think we're maybe at the point of shifting towards talking about something a little bit different. We started this session talking about climate and why do people like particular climates, what's their favourite, and it's a bit like, what's your favourite X? But then we started talking about what is it about those climates that leads to certain kinds of behaviours, maybe certain kinds of personality traits that we associate with people from different areas, friendliness, openness. now we're kind of starting to talk about this neighbourhood and what its history is, what people's experiences of it are. Has this area become sort of hollowed out? Are the people who maybe used to live in this area, it's become obviously very gentrified over the last few years? Has that changed the atmosphere? I think maybe not, at least from your experiences. So it'd be good to, I'll come to you in a second, but I think we'd like to hear from Oscar. It's the first time we've heard
I'm super curious to ask you how the area changed since Shard was built. Because Shard is not that far from here, is it?
Okay, so that's the pre or post Shard experiences.
Obviously to everyone, but since you've lived in the area for so many years,
Okay.
maybe you can have a...
That's a very specific question about your experiences pre and post Shard. I just wanted to, because you had something to bring in. We've ended up with this very specific Shard question. Let's just have two topics on the question on the table. We'll decide where we're going to go.
Okay. Just very quickly, a couple of very quick things about community. London, I love it. Member of my family. Everyone's very busy in this family of London, and I think that's part of why people are, quite impatient with each other. Because when lockdown happened, all of that hurry went away. I made friends with like half the people on my street, and there was another thing about community, which was
Liverpool Street.
yeah. So recently there's been a low traffic neighbourhood thing in my neighbourhood, restricting kind of access to cars to certain streets, and it is weirdly impressive and also sad how many people in the community have really organised and got really active against it. To be like, we want to drive our cars wherever. I disagree with them, but if you could, there are so many really important things that people are apathetic about. If you could harness that power for something that actually is a really big deal, exploitation of poor people or racism or environmental issues and stuff, you could do so much with that people power. Instead, they spend their time painting over the cameras on the LTN. So community, yes, and also community, maybe.
So I think there's kind of a couple of topics. One very specific question is Oscar, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oscar was asking whether people realise that has the city changed post-Shard, which is quite specific. I'm not sure that I have a very strong feeling of pre or post-Shard. And then there's another question about how should we harness the power of community organising? Should it be to maintain our ability to use motor vehicles in central London, or to create more livable streets, or just for something else? Generally positive. Where do we want to take this? We've got a few. Just want to start with you, Esther, then Tim, and then.
It's just
sorry,
a small point about the Shard, because the Shard has a lot of wanky people working. Potentially big businesses and things in there, and maybe more people in suits and stuff. So then maybe it makes people close off a bit more, because you're the average person walking around, I can't identify with that, and then maybe that's had a bit of influence over here. Yeah.
Fashion became more formal. Is that fashion became more formal? More people in suits?
Yeah, and then it's why are they in my neighbourhood? Also, second point about Khalil's about eating the rich. So maybe in Newcastle, because there's not that many rich people, then why would we want to eat? Because we're just all kind of the same, Whereas there is maybe a bit of us and them. Whereas in Newcastle, in places in the north, it's more community minded.
I'll come to you in a second, Max. What's it?
But I'm going to move to the community organizing conversation.
That's okay.
And it was a very interesting experience I had coming into London this time. So I work for a philanthropy that works specifically on cleaning air. So we do work a lot on, these no vehicle zones and things like that. And the person who was stamping my passport at the airport asked me what I do, and I had to share this information with him, and it made him launch into a very detailed conversation, rant actually, about how he doesn't want cars off the road, and I had no idea what to tell him, and I didn't want to piss him off. because I'd been standing in that line for 1 hour and I just wanted to get my stamp quickly and go back. But he had really, I was very surprised by how strong his feelings were about the fact that he didn't want this kind of work. But he did have one point, which is that he felt he couldn't afford an electric car. And I think there is a bigger question here of access and the fact that our transport systems are still very much leaning towards private transport, and I think UK is way ahead in terms of public transport, but still some people feel that they can't get around without a car, and how do you make that affordable and accessible for everyone? Because if there is good public transport accessible for everyone, I don't think an immigration officer would want to talk to a rando about how he can't afford an electric car.
Okay, so I mean, we're kind of merging these two topics in a way, because we've been talking a little bit about whether certain areas of London have been moved, like the populations have been shifting, demographics have been changing, maybe we've got lots of people living in the Shard or around the Shard, wearing particular kinds of formal fashions, but also we have to make decisions together about how do we use the city, what is the city used for, how do we get around it. I'll come to you in 1 second. I'm just going to go first to Tim because he had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, this is more like a slight tweak of your question, because I think here, I remember when the Gherkin got built, and that seemed to be a time, like in this area, when there was a big shift. Because I think by the time the Shard had kind of come up, there'd been a lot of that change in this area anyway, but when the Gherkin popped up, I remember that's when everything started to change over by Spitalfields, and it started to feel like a different kind of way of developing an or gentrification, basically. Yeah.
So maybe we're thinking about the sort of post-Gherkin, pre-Shard era. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think whenever cities do this, they have these big development plans. And they are planned, 20 years before they're happening. And I think it could be good for people to, maybe more beneficial for people to understand the bigger picture, but also give people something along the way. It's not going to replace the cars people do generally to go around. They're already in this local area changing, but looking at taking away bus routes that people's like, well, what am I going to use? Well, I need a car, all of these things. But generally speaking, I do like the move towards spaces that are, I can't remember the word that you use, livable streets, because I think what I like in terms of city planning and landscaping and all this kind of thing is that you're getting more of that to look at the streets as not just roads and so forth, but spaces that people could live in, have livelihoods. And I think there's some developments around London. Coal Drops Yard in King's Cross is a good one, where they use part of the canal as like an open cinema, and they have a public water feature. These are the sorts of things I've seen in Denmark, places like that, and I think it's about time that London experienced more of that kind of thing. So, it's right, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chantal. That's okay. Go ahead, Esther. What did you have to say on this?
Yeah, that story about the immigration officer really resonated because, yeah, you're right. If it's so bad, why should he should be doing his job? But it's awful. So in Singapore, I remember when I was a little girl and I used to go there. I remember thinking like, this is like a city from the future compared to where I live in the UK, because like everything works. And like when you take public transport, you don't have to wait like 15 minutes. And also there's somewhere to sit down. It's so like deeply inaccessible. Like I don't have kids, but I've got nieces, and if I want to take my little nieces out, I have to carry them up the overground. So obviously there's going to be this like push towards private ownership. But then thinking back about like community, there's not even. It's so rare that there would be a bench at the overground or at the tubes to actually sit with your neighbour or sit with another person, whereas in Singapore there's benches like everywhere. And then this thing about like the water feature at Coal Drops Yard, that makes sense and that's great, but if it's not like the really basic things like how we move around the city, then we shouldn't really be putting money into these pretty things. It should be these core basic things.
Okay, we've got a point from here and then.
I just wanted to sort of like put a spoke in the wheel, really. I mean, I like the idea of livable zones, and there's bollards, isn't there, to stop the cars going through and that kind of stuff, but it's always in uber middle class streets. And the whole of like Essex Road is a traffic jam of working class people trying to get to work in their vans. They can no longer take shortcuts. And then the middle class are all kind of going, oh, isn't this lovely? Sorry, I don't mean this view, but I mean, isn't this lovely how quiet the streets are finally, we've reclaimed them. But it's like, hang on a second, this is a working city and you're ignoring the working person that needs to drive a van to work. So I have got a little bit of a problem with that.
Okay, I mean now, I think we're kind of going, looking at all the different ways that you can divide up the city into different populations. I mean, is the issue of class been overlooked in urban transport, how we make decisions about how the city's used?
Yes. Class, race, disability, all sorts of stuff is so commonly overlooked when building infrastructure and stuff like that. And we're talking about community, we're talking about people power. I'm interested in why that immigration officer decided that you were the person to raise his grievance with and not actually complain to people who have like literal institutional power to make a difference. Why is he bending your ear and making you feel uncomfortable coming into the country instead of being out in the streets or writing to his MP or talking to his friends and family about it and stuff like that?
Okay, sorry, I think we had a direct...
Because we have to get off his backside and actually do something. It's too easy to just complain, open his mouth and just spew out things. It's harder, it takes more work, more thought, more effort, a bit more strategy sometimes to do some things.
Okay, sorry, I'll come to you both in a second, but Max, you had something to add.
I think, in terms of, just going back to sort of more rundown areas, why do they have more community? Why is it harder in London? Stagnation, both economically and homogeny, in terms of both in sort of job types, in economic backgrounds and racial backgrounds, makes it easier to unite. Two words I would never use to describe London is stagnated or homogenous at all. It is therefore harder for it to create this groundswell of people because unless it directly affects them, because there is less a united sort of consciousness there. You need to find a way of sort of these issues which unite people, which can bridge that gap. And sometimes it is just we all want to park our cars because we can all afford cars, and we all want this street because we all directly live in. It affects us to do it. It's harder to do that than have bus routes down in Hackney if you're up in even Brixton, even anywhere. Unless it's like the bus route you're using, you're not going to care because everybody's got their own goals.
Also, Northern doesn't exist.
Okay, sorry, I'll come to you in 1 second, but
it's just a couple of things, and I think Chantal is it. I think you said, when you were Esther, you were talking about fixing the things that don't work, the basics, rather than things that are pretty, and you said you can have both. I completely agree. I think that's what ends up happening is we go to like a default of people in poor areas only deserve to have the basic needs met. Why shouldn't you have things that are, make you feel better in your space, in your environment, and make you feel like the world is a more possible place? I'm a youth worker, and so a lot of the young people we work with, they just don't even, this is in East London, in Newham, the issues that they talk about the most, and it's not crime, it's not knife crime, it's not the things that the press often talks about, it is about discrimination, but it's also about the climate, and it's a massive, I think people keep thinking that climate change is an issue that just middle class young people talk about, and it's not at all. It's completely across. It so routinely comes up. We do these big every year. We do these big citizens' youth assemblies, and that's the only fixed one that we do every year because it comes up so much. And there's no in the borough, young people don't care about cars. Just don't care about it at all. They want to see stuff that doesn't have to include car infrastructure. So I worry that we are talking about stuff that relates to our current lived experience, but just doesn't relate to what young people see as being the future of their areas.
Alright, so yes, I just want to acknowledge that yes, there was, I did recognize even when it was happening that there was an aspect of power in this conversation. Having said that, I think it needs addressing that class does have a role to play in these things and it plays out differently. So in Delhi where I live, I was just telling Tim that the working class are the ones that use bicycles and they use public transport, and as a result, we don't we're not allowed to use bicycles in parks, or public transport is so shoddy in the sense that last mile connectivity is awful. Like, you would have to walk miles to reach a metro station, and nobody cares because the rich use cars, and there is an aspirational thing. So, you know, what we need ideally, livable streets should be for all communities. And I think young people across class are thinking about this right now, and that's why you see such, and yes, this is me with my worked in climate all my life hat on, but I think you see this across cultures, countries now, that young people care about this, and they all want livable streets across class.
Oh, I've forgotten what I was going to say, but no, I have got it. Well, one thing, like any period of transition is naturally going to be disruptive, so it could be that, you know, the implementation of quiet zones and thingy-bobs, inevitably, as it is all baked in, it could be just sort of weird. However, the other problem is that London is a huge city, and it tries, I think it's too piecemeal, and it's got too many, you need a holistic approach, and maybe it's impossible to have a holistic approach to a city this large. But it's often, I work in the cycling industry as well, and there's often kind of cycle routes put in, but not really thought out how they impact.
No, that's fine. I think we've been talking. This is Talkaoke, for those of you who just walked into the room. We are talking around this table so far about, well, it started out with temperature. How do people feel about different climates? Are they something that you learned as a young person? Do you bring them with you from your family, from your culture, from your origin? And now we're sort of talking about, we've ended up talking about how the city is used and how different groups in the city compete over its use and interpretation. And now we've kind of ended up talking about whether environmentalism is just for middle class people, and whether Liverpool streets are something that are just a concern for people kind of buying £8 lattes on Broadway Market, or should everybody stuck in a traffic jam on Essex Road also be involved in this conversation? So I did have I think, a point to be made on this topic before I got all tangled up. Thank you, Kieran. So please go ahead, and I'll keep moving the microphone. Esther?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, and we've been talking a lot about spaces, and how they're created, and what the result is, and a little bit we've been talking about people. And if we need to talk about people first, so what we need to do is study who's here, like what is it about this place? Because it's made by people. I just explained, I moved to Hampstead. It has equal green areas, hardly any, loads of one-way streets, but it has a very wealthy group of people, which is a bit, that cuts you out. But on top of that, there was a spiritual thing missing that you could get if you just went down to Kentish Town. It came back again, even though actually I really liked it. I think we need to look at what's sprinkled among us and maintain that and find a way to preserve it. Because when you have an artist like, say, Muckle next door at the music, his wife is an incredible artist. You want them to stay here, but they are being pushed out. And there is a way of doing it, and the problem is it's all siloed development by developers on a small site who don't even know what they're going to build. They just get the money, buy the site, then they're trying to figure out what they're going to build. There isn't a cohesive thought, which there could be, about how planning is done in various areas in London to create something that's quite magical and maintain it. But they haven't quite got what it is yet, and I think that chemistry needs to be discovered. And there are people looking at it, and have been for many years, but planners aren't really listening to them. I worked on the pedestrianisation of Broadway in New York. I try and pull an American out of his car. That's like some conversation. Yeah, so I do think that's important, but also you have to start with the practical. How do you get your van to fix the plumbing? And who do we need?
Okay, so in between one person speaking and the next, I'm actually going to exit the table. We're going to switch over. I know there are some people ready to talk, but...
yeah, let's give Saul a huge round of applause. And Saul's actually the co-founder of the Able to Speak. So he's got a lot of history behind him.
So you're saying there's less of this big conspiracy about homeless people, but it's more that maybe the government
People
they
don't
just
care.
don't care.
Yeah, and like in a deliberate way, because I think
Their final
people.
thought.
Yeah, I think in a deliberate way and in like a not aware way, which are both bad things.
Right, okay, so they're just pretending like, oh, we don't really know that there's an issue. Okay. Let's get a final thought from yourself before you leave us.
So it's not like a capitalist conspiracy, it's the nature of capitalism. You need people that want jobs so that you'll accept a low salary so you're not them.
Yeah.
They're there to scare you that it could be worse and keep you from not aiming higher.
But there's no way, it's just a...
It's the nature of the situation. There'll always be people that are on the bottom and they'll always be used as an argument to make you not try and be higher on the system.
Right, so it's, ooh, wow, so homelessness is just a byproduct of capitalism.
I just want to say the bar closes in 5 minutes, people. 5 minutes.
Guys, the bar closes in 5 minutes, so make sure you get your lunch drinks, you know? Any final thoughts?
I think one of the problems with tackling homelessness is the government does it local government, so it means that all the funding comes locally, and if one local government has really good funding for homelessness,
they moved to that borough.
then they get a problem with homelessness.
Oh,
Yes,
goodness.
Brighton, that's Brighton.
And the other thing is, I think homelessness is generally caused through the breakdown of support networks and the government not funding things like taking universal credit now is a blanket term. A lot of people become homeless because they've lost their benefits, they've lost that support network that they had, that they relied on, and now there's nobody to help them. Same with sort of mental health charities and organisations that are so badly funded now, and all those people that got nowhere else to go.
Interesting. I mean, in a way, this kind of links into what we were talking about before, about the fact that yes, we are more thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. Yes, we're more technologically connected to many people, but in fact, that means that we might actually be a bit more disconnected. I mean, what is the implications of having all these online connections, but not really being connected to anyone? Is that leading to more homelessness? Is there more homelessness now? Not only is there more stress, not only is there more anxiety, but there's actually more homelessness as a byproduct of technology. Is this the case? You already had it up, and then I'll come to you.
I forgot what my original point was because it was based on what Margot said, and she's gone and my ADHD kicked in. But when you're talking about relationship between technology and homelessness, often technology is weaponized against the homelessness, against the homeless population as well. So, for example, you have hostile architecture. You know, people designing entire built environments to be unusable for everyone, just to spite homeless people. So spikes on ledges and especially in America, not so much here, but you have sprinklers, sprinkling areas of concrete where people can sleep, stuff like that. And it's kind of, yes, technology, I think, has a role in the disconnects that sometimes lead people to kind of have this homelessness, but also it's again it can be such a tool in helping to help people out of it. You know, mutual aid networks, social media, stuff like that. But it can also be a tool to then further oppress the already oppressed.
Right, okay then, so technology's got these two sides. Where do you find that balance? Lucy, and then I'll come to you, Evie.
Do you know how many times I wanted to have a nap on a bench? I can't because there are embedded elbow rests because they've made it so I'm chronically tired also. It makes me think that we're also this kind of deflecting responsibility thing. It's the same with refugees in that it's all local councils reporting how many numbers they've got, we're going to move it to someone else, someone else's problem. But also just responding, Esther, to what you said. It's just made me think, because I was well, maybe I'm too fussed about measuring impact. But also, I feel yes, sometimes impact, you can't measure it. But if we're focusing on yes, the person who's volunteering benefits, that's not necessarily it needs to be for the people that are going.
What is measuring impact? How have you been measuring impact? What does that mean?
So for measuring impact, I work in public engagement with science. so that might be like science museum stuff and like whether someone comes to a museum and like what do they learn, and you can measure like someone coming into the museum and you can measure them, like did they look at that exhibition, what did they think, how did they find it, but like the long-term impact is really hard to measure because you can't measure whether someone then left the museum and then like kept the radio on for just a little bit longer and then listened to that thing and then became slowly more engaged with that topic. And so like that is kind of a, I guess, a microcosm of like, or an analogy of like how you can do long-term impact on anything. It's incredibly hard to measure your specific impact on a thing, but if you're paid because of that activity, like someone's funding you, it's like really useful to be able to be like, we helped change this huge thing because of So with that mind, I find like I just want to know what I can do, and I think Esther, like stop fussing around like what the kind of measurable thing is. Do what you think is helpful. I think it's helpful, but then my other mind is like, what is helpful? Am I helping? What's the point?
Right. So answer those questions and just do what feels good, basically. You know?
Well, that's what Esther said, but I'm saying like, what is the thing that feels good matches up with what is the right thing, and it might be.
What's the good thing? What's the right thing? Evie, and then I'll come to you, Karen, and then I'll come back to you, Esther.
Okay, yeah. No, I just don't know if things like hostile, like the spikes or the things on benches, is that a problem? I don't know if that is capitalism. I think that's people just not wanting to like be responsible for what they see as a problem, or be responsible for something that they would be upset by. I don't think it's capitalism. I just think it's people just not wanting to be responsible for something.
So you're saying it's people who they want to, just not take responsibility for homelessness. They're like, oh, let's put a price spikes there. They'll have to. Someone else will have to deal with it.
Like it's still not a good thing, right? But I just don't know if it's like part of
a bigger
system. I don't know. Maybe I'm not thinking about it.
Karen, Esther, Laura.
I got two little points because you mentioned Granary Square a long while back, and that's interesting because it's got security guards that stop anyone looking homeless coming into the area. So and it's a private space actually. It's not a public space, although it appears so. But it is actually very orchestrated, and a lot of people, I mean, I know our charity director looks homeless, and he often gets stopped by the security, and he has to say, no, I live through there, and then they realise quite quickly that it's quite discriminatory about anyone. But I was going to say about impact. The charity I work for is funded by the lottery, and they got rid of impact because they want anecdotal now, because they're sick of all these figures saying, we like, for instance, the charity I work in is HIV, and it's the hard end of HIV, so they're often dying. And so you do a survey on how well they're feeling. Well, they feel worse after coming to us, but it's not because of what we've done, it's because they're actually getting worse. And the National Lottery actually realised that this is a really bad way of measuring their funding. So they started looking at more anecdotal, and what they want from us now is loads and loads of case studies where people say, my health's got worse, but this charity helped me because they gave me this and that and the other. And I think that's the movement maybe towards.
Sounds like Lucy needs to be in here to sort of hear that, because that's talking about what unfortunately. So you're saying you're moving away from statistics and more into the personal. What's people's actual personal experiences when it comes to how has this charity helped me? Evie? Were you next, or Esther?
No, I've said my bit, so.
Lucy, maybe you might want to repeat that point about impact, right? You're saying your charity.
Oh, I'm just saying that the National Lottery have abandoned statistics as a way of measuring impact, and they just want anecdotal now. No, I'm talking about a serious grant, so 70 grand a year for 4 years, that's half our funding. And they just said that, we visit the charity, we check it out, we decide whether they're doing any good work or not, and then we want anecdotal reports, and we're not interested in statistics anymore because they're just faked half the time by a lot of people, because a lot of people just have to fill out those forms and they just do it. They've got to get the results.
Right. So it's not.
Yeah, well, it's the community interest. It's the big one that funds all the community.
I see. Esther?
Yeah, to Evie's point, I don't know whether it is capitalism, but it helps anti-capitalists and people that are angry at capitalism help to direct their anger and disgust towards something, which then also creates a sense of community, which is what we talk about more, because you can get together with the other capitalist-hating people. I do need to go.
Let's get a final thought from you before you leave us.
I did read something reassuring and inspiring the other day, which was it was in. I'm very late to the game, but like the Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, which I recommend. And it's a great book, but she quoted in there some research that. Because also there was mention of citizens' assemblies as well before, which is where you get a large group of people, usually like 75 to 100 people together to discuss and debate around a big issue and then make like policy recommendations.
Yeah.
So, but she found out that when you use the word citizen more, like in the language and the terminology, people actually come together to make fairer decisions for everyone, which goes back to that, to your point about not using them and talking about people, but yeah, let's just use citizen more. I mean, actually, that sounds kind of weird for us to use citizen, but maybe like policymakers and like people that have the power.
The language,
even that
language can be used to help to bring people together. So citizen can make people feel a better sense of being part of a community. But maybe then it goes back to what you were saying about the dividing, people who are not homeless with people who have a home for now. Lorna, and then I'll come to you next. Thank you for joining us.
I was going to say that, I mean, if people trace the history of, not the history of homelessness, because there's always been homeless people, but this great swathe of homelessness, probably it came from the 80s when Maggie Thatcher sold off all the council properties. So people were living in the property, you had a right to, you could stay in there, but if the parent died, and it still goes now, then they couldn't stay in the property, and the council they changed up the way that they allocated their properties, their flats. You know what I mean? So now people don't have any. Young people, they don't have anywhere to live, so and they stop building, so where else are they supposed to go? They go on the street, because we had in the 80s it was, about Cardboard City on the Charing Cross. So, I mean, now it's
so you say the manufacturer kind of implemented some laws which meant that, for example, if your parent died, you could no longer stay in their home. You had to, so you have people
and councils couldn't use the money to build new properties.
Right, so councils couldn't use that. Okay, wow.
They gave the money to the rich.
Right, so they fed the money back into the people who already have power.
It seems like a very simple solution, which is like the government can do, which is build social housing and keep building it. And don't stop building it.
Keep building it.
Yeah.
When did they stop? Why did they stop? Did they stop?
Because Margaret Thatcher believed in private ownership and she wanted to get rid of the council houses. That's what, and we're still living in that era.
Yeah, so we're still living in the post-Margaret Thatcher era. Did you come in next?
I hope we can all agree that Margaret Thatcher is smiling up at us from hell. But my point was based on Esther's last point, and I can't remember what it was. What was it?
Oh, it was all about language.
Yeah, citizen. So she was talking about the word citizen potentially being a uniting thing. And it's interesting because if we can make it become that, then yes. But at the moment, it still remains a very divisive word. There's all these conversations going on, especially you look at all the Tory leadership candidates who might be our next Prime Minister, they're all banging on about divisive stuff about immigration and refugees and citizenship. So citizenship is actually a really hot button to learn. So for example, I also work in public engagement with science, and there's a whole thing about kind of this thing that used to be called citizen science, which is getting the communities involved in participating in scientific research. And we're moving towards calling it community science. Because if you say this is for citizens, this is a citizen science, that automatically either explicitly or implicitly excludes a whole bunch of people. Whereas if you call it community science, then A, it makes it more inclusive, and B, it means that you're using it to build community.
So you say maybe this word citizen is actually it's no longer relevant, or it's, what's the word?
I'm not saying I have a hard stance or a decent take on the word citizen, but like it'd be cool if it could become, like Esther said, a way of uniting people, but Currently, it's a way of dividing.
It's a divisive thing, or okay, so we want to move away from that and maybe towards.
I don't know what the answer is. I'm just
What's the answer? What's the answer? All right, maybe Evie, what do you have? What you next? Do you have something to say?
No, I feel like I go to a lot of community events in my local area and like maybe around, but I sometimes worry it gets a bit overlooked. Like it's like a way like, oh, it's a community thing, and everyone's like, oh yeah, cool, fine, and then kind of like pass off. But it's used so much as a word that people kind of like, it's kind of lost its meaning. Maybe.
Right. Okay then. So you said maybe that word community just doesn't really hold much weight anymore.
Yeah, it gets used a lot in like the wrong sense, like a bit like greenwashing or something. Like it's like I feel like a lot, like for example, that lots like new developments would say like we're putting on a community festival. It's like yeah, but none like you haven't got any social housing or like the affordable housing you're selling is £400,000. Yeah, exactly. So I think sometimes it just gets like people just throw it out there like, oh, that makes it okay because we've got on a community festival, so it doesn't matter that we bought build loads of really expensive houses.
In a way.
Yeah. But maybe that's a bit of a downer.
Yeah. I mean, okay, but you still go to quite a lot of community events.
I 100% agree with Evie, and Leo also saying that community science stuff interesting. There was something I also said I had to say, but I actually forgot.
Was it about citizenship? I mean, maybe it's time to do maybe it's time to do a bit of a recap. We were talking about homelessness, we're talking about, the language we use to describe homeless people. We're talking about capitalism in relation to homelessness. Impacts, how do we measure impacts? Manufacture, housing, there's a lot going on. Community events. Do you go to community events? What do you think about some of these topics? Citizenship, or where do you want to take the conversation? What do you want to talk about?
I got stuck in a thinking branch off of building more social housing.
That was it.
Which I 100% definitely think I do, and then I think like, okay, then where would we put it? And I know that councils in London do a lot to build on top of other old councils, like increasing densities. But also, I don't think that there's a housing crisis. I just think that we're very London-centric as a country and as a, well, this community clearly is because we live here. But I think there is housing stock that isn't being used in other parts of the country that if they got given opportunities might interest people to go there and start communities themselves.
Right, so you say maybe it's time that we kind of like pack our bags and head out to other sort of cities, other villages, other towns in the UK, instead of being so London-centric.
Can I say the point?
Absolutely.
I remember waiting in the Talkaoke queue. On the social housing, I was like walking back from an event with someone who I only just met, and I was like, what do you do? And they're like, I'm an architect for social housing. And I was like, oh, interesting. I have an understanding that people who design social housing aren't great. It's kind of how I coded it. Like, I feel like people don't design social housing with the people in mind. And basically, I had a new understanding of what social housing is. Just like, no, I really care about the designs that I make. Whenever I have to redo a design for any like set of council blocks, there's like the government has to repay and make money, so it has to put some private ownership in there to make back their money to even build the block. But she had a huge vendetta against the buyback scheme, in that like if you've been in for a social housing for like 4 years, you can then buy it, because then that means when that block then needs to be rebuilt, you have to build. Maybe a fellow architect can explain. Outed an architect. That more housing that has to be built to then make the money back from that own thing. It's like perpetuating a cycle. So she was like, it's great people get ownership over a house, but also it's really irritating for the whole system, because actually the shared ownerships, not shared ownership, buyback scheme, is problematic. And I didn't realise that even existed in the whole thing.
So this whole buyback scheme is just kind of recycling the problem, basically. And then Evie, and then I'll come to yourself. Khalil? Khalil?
What was the last thing you said?
Moving out of London.
Without wanting to be glib, speaking as someone who grew up in a very multicultural city, as a young Arab post 9/11, no, I ain't going to the countryside. No, I think yes, being less London-centric in that, giving people reasons to stay in the communities they grew up in, good. But expecting people to move from, like for example, with the that estate in Elephant and Castle, where people were offered flats in like Birmingham. These are people who grew up in Elephant and Castle, and you're asking them to uproot their whole shit. So I think yes, being more less London-centric for the benefit of those communities outside of London, good. But expecting that to kind of leech some people out of London and make them have a better life somewhere else, I think is unrealistic.
Right. Okay, so you say it's unrealistic for people to just decide that actually, maybe I want to buy a house. Maybe let me just move outside of London. For some people, to have that expectation. Yeah. Chantel, and then I'll come to you, and then I'll come back to yourself.
I think the properties are in London, but it's affordability for people who are way under the average wage. People who wage threshold could never be even 25 grand, because they are cleaners, they are the people who work in the coffee shop, they are people that do essential things actually, ticket, inspect people on the trains, etc. They can't afford to live near or struggling to live close to where they work, and even spending much more than money traveling and commuting. That's where the problem is as well. So shifting it away because also this similar issues because I know I'm aware that Manchester and Birmingham getting a massive building or development. But some of the issues are probably happening there, So it still comes back down to there needs to be more housing, perhaps, I don't know, people who are more influential, like work in architecture. They need to well, they probably are, I don't know, talk with the government about effective policy, looking at changes of class of use of properties, like what the use classes, you've got these different classes of buildings. Everyone's wages to meet.
People who are doing essential jobs, but they're just not earning enough money to even be able to live in the city. So them moving out is not going to make some problem.
So that's my final point.
Oh, that's it. Final thoughts from yourself. Thank you very much for joining us.
I think that the UK and London have some peculiar qualities that are unique to them that are not great for things like social services and housing. So for most, I think, Western industrialized countries, you wouldn't have the same city be the center of finance, government, media, tech, what else? Education to some extent. But in the UK, there are those things in other places, but it's very much that if you are serious about those careers, they are very centered in London. I think that for the modern era, it's kind of reached a breaking point as far as what the infrastructure currently can accommodate. I think that there is an opportunity for tech with people working remotely. I think it's a better opportunity now than there ever has been to distribute some of these things elsewhere. At the same time, I live here specifically, and I wouldn't want to live elsewhere in the UK. And I feel like realistically, making better use of the space is going to be very key. The city is beautiful, and I love the fact that so much of the traditional architecture is protected. However, it has an absurdly low skyline for the population. I think we kind of need to get over the mentality that a tower block is not a nice place to live. In Manhattan, that is a very prestigious place to live, up in the clouds, and in a lot of other places. And I think perhaps a mental shift in that direction would help. Just simply because building up would make a lot of sense, and with safety measures, of course. But
So you're saying we need to open our minds when it comes to architecture and build higher?
I think so, and it would be great to also have floors, on a high-rise that are communal, and floors that are maybe a garden, and a roof, and outdoor space, so maybe a different type of high-rise than we've seen before. But I do think that building upward would be a great way to add more residential units.
Yeah, so building upwards is the way forward for you. Sorry, what's your name again? We got Kurt, I'm going to go Kurt, and then I'll come to, I know you had your hand up Nell, and then Lorna.
This will be my final point as well. I did agree with both of what you said. I think what came out wrong is how I said it is. I don't think people should be pushed out of London. I think there should be pools out of London, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So like, an example being HS2, they decided to build it, interestingly, from south to north, and it would decrease the train journey from London to Manchester by 20 minutes, but from Leeds to Manchester, there was still like not proper infrastructural transport, especially like the northern city connection. And you are right, London has the lowest levels in any major European city, with a large portion of them being on 2 floors. And humanitarily, a human scale building could be 5 floors to take in. So, and a lot of densely populated cities do have 5-floor buildings that are majorly based around like pubs, transportation spaces.
I see. All right, so you're pro building higher, not building wider?
Yeah, but also I don't know how we're going to do that.
Yeah, how would you do that? How would you say, well guys, it's time for final thoughts. All right, I don't know, you had your hand up next, so let's get final thoughts.
I mean, it's just quickly, it's my final thought in response to what you were saying. I mean, in the 60s, I wasn't here in the 60s, I was, but I could see the tower blocks that was there. And in the, is it 90s, 2000s, they pulled them down because, okay, maybe some of them had asbestos or whatever, right? But then I think my conspiracy is that they didn't want working class people to see the same skyline, to see the same view as those multi-million-pound flats. That's all I'm
So you're saying that there's
that's my final thought. My conspiracy.
So you're saying there's some like maybe class issues around even having a view. Wow, they don't want poorer people to be able to look down. How interesting. Whoa, you've really dropped a bomb on us there. Any final thoughts, Chantal? That's it. All right. Well, we're going to go around for final thoughts.
Lorna, you touched on something that I wanted to say earlier, but it fell out of my sieve brain, which is when we're talking about the Shard and the Gherkin and the other skyscrapers that get built in London, they feel like an act of dominance. They feel like an act of violence. Like, I live in Streatham and I grew up in Brixton. So when I walk to my mum's house in Brixton, or when I walk to the train station, I'm looking due north up Brixton Road, and I can see, like that tower in Lord of the Rings with the big red glowing eye at the top? It's that. It's like, at night it glows, and it feels like an assertion of the power of money over the city, and over the people of the city. And that, I think that is partly what you were talking about in that most of the time, working people live kind of at ground level, and so a lot of the bigger elevated stuff in the centre is, again, it's this kind of like dominance display, and I find it unsettling.
Wow, so you were saying that actually people should build up, we should build social housing, skyscrapers full of social housing, but in fact, apparently, according to the conspiracy, there once was where they taught them down to the level of the poor people looking down on everyone else. How interesting. Evie, final thoughts?
Or like you say, like you can charge a lot more for that. Like people are like, well, why would I offer this as social housing when I could sell it or own it and rent it out for a lot more? Because I guess that property is just like a commodity. But the Shard is quite useful when you're lost. I have to say. So, you know, like, and I think that's quite good about some tall buildings, that you can find your way when you're lost.
I'm just annoyed they filled in SE1 for the foundations. That was a great one.
Oh, see, that's the art history of London.
My final thought about tower blocks is that they're built to steal the light from us, and us being like everyone else. So they're going to build across here, and that's all facing west, and that will take the whole light of the very first social housing ever built, purposely built, that is here, and they're all going to be in the dark. So they're stealing light, and then they don't even bloody live in them. They come for 1 month a year.
Oh, wow. So I mean, you're saying that, wow, how interesting that it's actually going to steal the light, the tower block, so it's not that great. Any final thoughts?
I feel like I had my fun.
You had your final
but
thoughts?
also, I don't like tower blocks.
You don't like tower blocks. Okay, so you won't be architecturing any tower blocks anytime soon.
I just want to say that I was at the very first Talkaoke 25 years ago.
Wow.
I just want to congratulate Mikey for reaching
Fantastic.
25 years.
What were some of the things spoken about 25 years ago?
Oh, I don't know, it was always a mixed bag of stuff all the time. It was really interesting. It's been very wonderful. And I've come to loads of them over the years, Creamer Street and all sorts of parties everywhere. Just wherever I went out, I went, oh, there's Mikey and it's Talkaoke, wow.
Yeah.
But more often than not, I was just floating around, but I'm a bit shy. I don't talk as much as I should. Anyway, but it's very congratulations for reaching 25 years. Here's to the next 25 years.
We have one of the original Talkaoke guests sitting around the table. Thank you for joining us. Any final thoughts from yourself, Mikey, for your 25th birthday?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey for everybody, and as Ron says, you know, it's just the beginning. But you know, it's great to see all loads of people in this table. Yourself, I mean, let's have a big round of applause for Ella. Who's always been a star, multi-talented, not just in front of the camera, behind the camera, and somehow in the editing system as well. But also, you know, we've had Saul here, we've had my brother Dave, who was also at the first Talkaoke ever. We've had so many people, and it's just been, it's been great to sort of celebrate it. I mean, you know, to me it doesn't feel like 25 years, I feel like it's one long conversation. And that's it, I keep the conversation going. And people always ask me, what is the best, what's the weirdest, what's the funniest? And to me it's just, you know, it's just more about that flow of just keeping going, listening to people.
Sell it to Netflix.
Happy birthday to you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and yes, see you at the next 50th Talkaoke celebration. All right. See you next time. All right.